The hangar had been under emergency lighting for 6 hours. Not because of a power failure. Because the lead engineer had requested it, saying the standard lighting created glare on the diagnostic screens, which was technically true and also communicated something about the state of a team that had been staring at the same engine for 18 days and had run out of ideas they were willing to say out loud. The aircraft was a Gulfstream G700. Private. Belonged to a logistics consortium whose board was scheduled to fly to a critical merger negotiation in 48 hours. The negotiation had been arranged over 4 months. The other party would not reschedule. The consortium's commercial flight alternatives had been reviewed and ruled out for security and timing reasons. The engine had a fault that 6 certified aerospace engineers, 3 external consultants, 1 manufacturer's representative, and $6 million in diagnostic equipment deployed over 18 days had not been able to locate, replicate, or resolve. The word impossible had been used twice in the last hour. The woman standing beside the engine had not used it. Her name was Serena Voss and she was the CEO of the consortium's aviation division, and she had not used the word impossible because she considered it a form of surrender, and she did not surrender on timelines that mattered. She was also running out of alternatives. The man who walked into the hangar at 7 in the evening had come to fix the auxiliary generator in the maintenance bay at the back of the building. He had a toolbox and a work order and a 7-year-old daughter named Mia who was doing her homework in the break room because school was out and the babysitter had cancelled and the generator work was urgent, and sometimes life requires you to bring your child to the hangar. His name was Rowan. He was 38 years old. He looked at the engine when he walked in because it was the kind of thing you look at when you walk into a room and something large and complicated is clearly wrong with it and a team of people in expensive shirts are standing around it looking defeated. He kept walking toward the maintenance bay. He stopped. He turned back. He looked at the engine for a long moment with the particular stillness of someone who has seen something and is deciding whether to say so. Before we begin, if you believe that the person who solves the problem is not always the most credentialed person in the room but the most present one, please like this video, subscribe to Kindness Tales and to the Kindness Legacy at Kindness Tales, and share this with someone who needs to believe in quiet expertise today. He did not walk to the engine immediately. He walked to the diagnostic cart and looked at the readouts without touching anything, with the careful non-invasive attention of someone trained to observe before acting. One of the engineers noticed him. He said, "This is a restricted area. You need to stay in the maintenance corridor." Rowan said, "I know. I'm the generator contractor. I'm not touching anything. Can I ask a question?" The engineer said, "About what?" Rowan said, "The fault pattern. Is it intermittent or consistent?" The engineer looked at him. He said, "It's intermittent." "Why?" Rowan said, "Has it presented the same way every time or differently?" A second engineer had turned around. The second engineer said, "Differently. Slightly different symptoms each occurrence. That's part of why we can't replicate it cleanly." Rowan looked at the engine. He said, "When you run the diagnostic sequence, what order do you run it in?" The second engineer said, "Standard protocol. Primary systems first, secondary cascade." Rowan said, "Have you tried reversing the sequence?" Silence. Not the silence of a room that has dismissed something. The silence of a room that has registered something. Serena Voss had turned around. She said, "Who are you?" He said, "Generator maintenance. I'm here for the auxiliary unit in the back." She said, "What do you know about turbofan diagnostics?" He said, "I know some things." She said, "Be more specific." He said, "I spent 11 years as a certified aerospace mechanic before I started the generator business. Primarily turbofan and turboprop. I left the field when my wife passed and I needed work I could do closer to home for my daughter. The generator work is local. The other knowledge is still there." She looked at him. She said, "Why would reversing the diagnostic sequence make a difference?" He said, because if the fault is in the secondary thermal compensation system, the standard primary first protocol creates a cascade that masks it. By the time you get to secondary, primary has already normalized the readings. You're looking at a clean picture of a system that isn't clean. She said, the manufacturer's rep ran the standard protocol 4 times. He said, yes. 4 times at the correct sequence. If I'm right, 4 times in the wrong order for this specific fault type. A third engineer had stood up from the laptop. The room had 12 people in it and all 12 were paying attention. Serena said, you're saying $6 million in diagnostics was running the right tool in the wrong sequence. He said, I'm saying it's possible. I could be wrong. I haven't touched the system and I've been looking at it for 4 minutes. She said, what would you need to test it? He said, 30 minutes and access to the secondary diagnostic panel. She looked at her lead engineer. The lead engineer said nothing for a moment. He said, it's a reasonable hypothesis. We didn't test it because the standard protocol is standard for a reason. Serena said, and how has standard been working for us? The lead engineer said nothing. She looked at Rowan. She said, you have 30 minutes. A kindness tale. Before we continue, the kindness legacy at Kindness Tales wants you to know who Rowan was before that hangar and what had shaped the knowledge he carried into it. His name was Rowan Mercer and he had trained as an aerospace mechanic at 22 at a technical college that had accepted him on a partial scholarship arranged by a program coordinator named Mrs. Dillard, who had seen his aptitude scores and made 3 phone calls on his behalf without telling him she was making them. He had found out 2 years after graduating when he ran into her at a hardware store and thanked her for something else, and she had mentioned the calls in passing, the way people mention things they did not consider remarkable. He had worked for 11 years at a regional aircraft maintenance company where a senior mechanic named Hector had taught him something that the training program had not. Hector had said, the machine will tell you what's wrong if you stop running your protocol long enough to listen to it. The protocol exists because most problems are common problems. The protocol fails when the problem isn't common. Rowan had thought about that for 11 years. He had thought about it when his wife Lena got sick and he had left the field to be home with Mia and had built the generator business from 1 van and 2 contracts because generators were local and local meant he could pick Mia up from school and be at her recitals and make dinner with her on Tuesday nights when she wanted to make something complicated. He had thought about it when the cases he saw in the generator work were the cases the manual didn't cover and he had to listen to the machine instead of running the protocol. He was thinking about it now. He opened the secondary diagnostic panel. He ran the sequence in reverse. The room was very quiet. At the 4-minute mark a reading came up on the secondary panel that had not appeared in 18 days of forward sequence diagnostics. The lead engineer walked over and looked at it. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, that's the fault. A technician said, that can't be right. That component passed inspection. Rowan said, the component passed inspection because it's not faulty on its own. It's a calibration interaction between the secondary thermal compensator and the fuel flow regulator. Neither one is broken. They're misaligned with each other by a margin that only presents under specific load conditions. The standard diagnostic doesn't catch it because by the time it reaches secondary the primary readings have already adjusted for the variance. The lead engineer said, a calibration interaction. He said, yes. Uncommon. I've seen it twice. Both times the forward protocol missed it. Serena said, can you fix it? He said, yes. 45 minutes. Maybe less. She said, then fix it. He fixed it in 38 minutes. He was precise and unhurried and talked through what he was doing in the quiet, specific way of someone who has done difficult things for long enough that the difficulty has become ordinary. The engineers watched. Some of them took notes. One of them, the youngest, a recent graduate named Felix who had been at the diagnostic table for 18 days and had begun to feel, in the private way of young professionals, that his education had not prepared him for the actual texture of the work, asked questions. Rowan answered all of them. Fully. Without condescension. With the additional explanations that good teachers give without being asked because they understand that the question behind the question is usually more important than the question itself. At the end Felix said, "How do you know when you've actually found the problem and not just a symptom?" Rowan said, "You know, because the machine becomes quiet. Not silent. Just the right kind of quiet. A machine that's been fighting itself stops fighting." Felix wrote that down. Serena watched all of it. She watched the engine and she watched Rowan and she watched her team of certified engineers who had spent 18 days and $6 million looking for something that a generator contractor had identified in 4 minutes by asking a question none of them had thought to ask. She was not a person who enjoyed being wrong. She was a person who had built a career on understanding that being wrong correctly, meaning fast and honestly and with attention to what the wrongness reveals, was more valuable than a protected record. She had been wrong about where the answer was. She had been right to give him 30 minutes. The engine ran clean. The test sequence completed without fault. The lead engineer said, "I'd want a secondary confirmation run before I'd certify it." Rowan said, "I'd want 2. Run them 6 hours apart. If both come back clean, you're airworthy." The lead engineer said, "Agreed." He looked at Rowan. He said, "The calibration interaction. I've been certified for 19 years. I've never encountered it." Rowan said, "It's rare. And it only presents under load conditions that your ground diagnostics don't fully replicate. You weren't missing something obvious. You were missing something that requires a specific combination of experience and a willingness to run the sequence backwards." The lead engineer said, "Who taught you to run it backwards?" Rowan said, "A man named Hector. He told me to stop running the protocol long enough to listen to the machine." The lead engineer said, "Where is Hector now?" Rowan said, "Retired. Lives near his grandchildren. Last I heard he was fixing neighbors' lawnmowers for free because he couldn't stop." The lead engineer almost smiled. He said, "That sounds about right." Serena found Rowan in the break room. His daughter Mia was at the table with her homework spread out and a juice box that someone from the kitchen had brought her and a complete lack of interest in anything happening in the hangar because she was working on a story for school and the story required her full attention. Serena stood in the doorway. She said, "May I come in?" Mia looked up and assessed her. She said, "Yes. But we're working." Serena said, "I won't stay long." She looked at Rowan. She said, "The board flies in 46 hours. Because of you." He said, "Because of Hector." She said, "I'd like to compensate you appropriately. Not the generator rate. What you actually did tonight." He said, "I have a rate for diagnostic consultation. I haven't used it in a few years but it's on file somewhere." She said, "Send it to my office. I'll double it." He said, "That's not necessary." She said, "It is necessary. What you did tonight saved a negotiation that took 4 months to arrange. That has a value. You have a rate. I will pay double it and that will still be inadequate but it will be honest." He said, "Send it to the office at the generator company. I'll find it." She said, "I also want to say something that isn't about money." He said, "All right." She said, "I have a team of 12 certified professionals who have been in this hangar for 18 days. Not one of them asked the question you asked in 4 minutes." He said, "They were running the protocol. Protocol is usually right. It just wasn't right for this." She said, "You knew to ask if it was right for this." He said, "Hector." She said, "Hector taught you." "Who taught Hector?" Rowan looked at his daughter. He said, "I don't know. Someone who taught him to listen to the machine instead of just running the sequence. It goes back. Mia said, without looking up, that's what you say to me about homework. You say listen to the problem before you run the method. Rowan looked at her. He said, you remember that. She said, you say it a lot. Serena looked at Mia. She said, your father is very good at his work. Mia said, I know. He fixed Mrs. Okonkwo's generator in the dark once. She gave us soup. Serena said, that sounds like a good outcome. Mia said, it was very good soup. She went back to her story. Serena looked at Rowan. She said, I want to offer you something beyond tonight if you're interested. A consulting arrangement. Not full-time. We have aircraft coming through this facility regularly, and the kind of problem you solve tonight is not as rare as we'd like it to be. Hector's principle, applied regularly, by someone with your background. He said, I have the generator business. She said, I know. The arrangement would fit around it. Local. Flexible. You'd set the parameters. He said, I'd need to think about it. She said, of course. He said, can I ask you something? She said, yes. He said, when the engineer said I needed to stay in the maintenance corridor. You were the one who let me keep talking. Why? She looked at the engine visible through the break room window, clean and quiet under the hangar lights. She said, because for 18 days I had been listening to the most qualified people in the room. And the most qualified people in the room had not found the answer. When someone less qualified asked a question none of them had asked, I decided that credential was not the organizing principle I needed in that moment. He said, what was? She said, the question itself. It was the right question. I don't care who asks a right question. I care that it gets asked. He looked at her. He said, Hector used to say something similar. She said, Hector sounds like someone I would have wanted in my hangar a long time ago. He said, he'd have been here about an hour and found it in 4 minutes and fixed it in 38. She said, like his student. He said, I hope so. Mia finished her story at 9:15 and read it to her father in the break room while Serena's team ran the first confirmation diagnostic on the engine. The story was about a girl who fixed a spaceship that nobody else could fix because she listened to it instead of pressing all the buttons at once. Rowan said, where did you get that idea? Mia said, from you. You say listen before you do. He said, when did I say that? She said, always. He said, you remember a lot of things I say. She said, you say good things. He put his arm around her. She leaned into him. Outside the break room window the engine was quiet in the right way. The way a machine goes quiet when it has stopped fighting itself. The way things go when the right question has finally been asked. And answered. By the person who walked in to fix something else entirely and stayed because something larger needed fixing and he could not unknow what he knew. This is the kindness legacy at Kindness Tales. Not always a dramatic gesture. Not always a rescue. Sometimes it is 11 years of learning from a man named Hector. Sometimes it is a daughter who remembers what her father says. Sometimes it is walking into a room to do one job and recognizing that another job is waiting. And asking the question. The simple one. The one nobody else thought to ask. If this story stayed with you, please like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs it today. Subscribe to Kindness Tales and join the Kindness Legacy at Kindness Tales for more stories of quiet expertise, unexpected grace, and the people who change everything by listening before they act. Because the answer is almost always there. In the machine. In the child. In the question nobody has asked yet. You just have to stop running the protocol long enough to hear it. Welcome to Kindness Tales. Welcome to the Kindness Legacy. We are so glad you are here.